To have passion in life is everything.
What's your Everest?
Oh,
Is it
yeah.
that 200-inch buck?
They just look so impressive when they're wide.
Especially running away.
Welcome to this week's episode of Eastmans Elevated.
It's like a think tank for outdoor activity.
Sounds exactly like my hunting. Just always thinking about it, always trying to evolve it and make it better.
Here's your host, Brian Barney.
Hey, checking in on you guys. How's your week going? It's Monday here, and we got about 6 inches of fresh snow and blowing out of the north, so springtime in Montana. So I'm in the office today and trying to get some work done and get this podcast ready to release. So on this episode, I have on Gabe Donay. I met Gabe Donay through social media. He's been a big supporter of Eastmans Elevated, and he's just a really knowledgeable guy. He spends a lot of time doing competitive archery and tinkering with his bow, really knowledgeable there, and then also a backcountry bow hunter. So I wanted to get him on the podcast and just break down setting up a hunting bow from scratch. It's such important information to get out there, and these competitive archers, they have such a great knowledge base, you know, as they have to get pinpoint accuracy shot after shot after shot as they're pushing the limits of what these bows can do. And so when these guys talk, I listen and gather information as I'm just trying to get as good at backcountry bow hunting as I can. And a big part of that, or a big facet of that, is being a good shot, a good archer. Like every shot, every hunt that you go on, to be successful, you're going to have to make a shot. And a lot of them are high degrees of difficulty, especially in the cloud of adrenaline. And so just the more information and better shot I can become, you know, the better off I'm going to be and the better off you guys are going to be. So we get a little technical on this podcast, but there's just great tips and tactics all the way throughout it, just about tuning and you know, different theories on bow setup and just how we set up our bows from scratch. And so, you know, I know you'll pick up some great information in this and hopefully take your bow shooting to the next level. So fun one for me. I enjoyed it. I learned some, and I think you guys will too. Sponsor for today's show is Tecnu. Tecnu, they're a great company. I've learned a lot of interesting facts about their company since they've become a sponsor, as their product was actually developed for nuclear fallout, and they figured out that it removed the oils in poison oak and poison ivy. And so this Tecnu, it's just a miracle worker if you do get into poison oak or poison ivy, which we're just coming into that season now, and that stuff is the worst when you get it on you. And I know, like, even this spot I fish, like, I'll take my dog with me, and I'll be wearing waders, and I won't get any on me, but my dog will get some, and I'll end up petting him, and then I'll get poison oak, or I think it's poison oak in there on me. So it's just an awesome product to have around. It'll remove skunk smell. So, you know, the old wives' tale of tomato juice and that stuff, if your dog gets into a skunk, it doesn't really work. And this stuff will actually neutralize the oils in skunk, in the odor and break it down. And so it's good to have for that. It'll remove sap. It does so many great things. They're also coming out with they're revamping a line that has like some healing properties in it. It's like their first aid kit that they're going to come out with. So be on the lookout for that. But Tecnu, just a great company and a great product, and if you're into any poison oak or poison ivy, make sure you have some around. The time to buy Tecnu is now, before you get into it, not after you get into it and have to wait 2 days for it to ship. So have a bottle of it in your medicine cabinet, and that way you're good to go. Thanks to Tecnu for sponsoring Eastman's Elevated. We sure appreciate their support. Yeah, over there at Eastman's, keeping in contact with the guys. We're just all getting really busy here and getting ready. I know Wingman, they're getting ready to do some turkey hunting, and I might go turkey hunting a little bit this year. I've kind of been hooked on sheds here lately, renewed vigor to go find some of those things. So I've been having fun doing that. But yeah, we're just grinding away. Just turned in a really fun article for the Eastman's Bow Hunting Journal. I was right to the deadline. I think I had to turn it in on April 1st, and I turned it in on April 1st. Just so busy. But anyways, a great article, really fun one to write, and I've really been working with my pictures a lot lately and working on my editing and learning, you know, some of those more technical editing programs. I can just get lost in there with the layers and just all the stuff you can do, and I've just barely got a grasp on it, but starting to edit up some pretty good pictures, and it's a big part of being a photographer is being able to do quality edits, and I've always been able to change the colors a little bit here or there, like just like an Instagram filter, like, I can use a computer program like that, but I haven't got into these more technical ones, and so I finally bit the bullet, and I've been working on that. So it turned in some really good photos for this new article. I'm pretty pumped on those, and just getting a lot of content, recording some really good podcasts. I can't wait to release to you guys here, and just keep this ball rolling. But it's been fun. So, yeah, I better get this podcast rolling. I've been talking for way too long on the intro. Here we go. Eastmans Elevated, Gabe Donay, and I. Here we go. Okay, I'm live here with Gabe Donay. Thanks for being on, Gabe.
Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is awesome. So I wanted to get you on. You're doing... I'm always seeing you shooting, and you do so much competitive archery, and I just wanted to get you on and just talk setting up a hunting bow from scratch and kind of talk about all the finer points of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm definitely a bow tinker. I've worked as an archery technician. A lot of my younger life, I worked for a lot of the big box stores that sell bows. I also worked at a really, really cool pro shop back east for a little bit. But I love tinkering with bows. That's I'm definitely in love with the process of setting up a bow. So I'm more than happy to go through that with you.
Yeah, me too. I love messing with them. I love trying to get them to shoot better. And for me, like a lot of the tournament guys, they talk about their hunting bow like it's secondary, or like it doesn't need to be as accurate. It doesn't need to be as precise. But me, I mean, I live for backcountry bow hunting, and when I'm grinding out 8, 9, 10 days and I get one shot at the buck I want the absolute most forgiving setup I can shoot, and so I pay a lot of attention to my hunting setup and spend a lot of time tuning on it.
No, absolutely, and I completely agree with you. I mean, the worst thing in the world would be to spend that kind of time, that kind of resources, and have that one opportunity during a hunting season to capitalize on a great representation of the animal that you're after, and have an issue come up that was caused by your setup and not yourself. I mean, it's one thing to, own it, that you made a mistake, but it's killer to have an equipment, not necessarily failure, but just something not come through in the clutch when it should have.
Yeah, which happens, both failure for me and failure for my weapon, or you learn over the years.
Absolutely.
You make mistakes, or, for me too, it's all about, it's a game of inches, trying to hit exactly where you want, and sometimes an inch can make a difference between getting that animal and not, and so when I'm setting up my bow, I'm looking for the most forgiving setup to where if I make a little mistake here or there, like that arrow's still going to hit home.
Exactly, and that's basically what tuning is. Tuning is basically realizing that we as human beings behind this machine are going to make mistakes, and what we're tuning is we're trying to tune the best scenario, to basically miss the least, and that's essentially what tuning your bow is to try to take your margin of miss as low as it can possibly be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and with that too, there's other little tricks to setting up a bow from scratch that make such a huge difference. Like you say, mechanical failure. Like I know, and we'll just start with the bow and we'll kind of go through our process of setting it up, and then we'll talk about what's important to us and why we move things and the reason for. But like I know, talking about mechanical failure, like having a string loop that's too tight, like if you don't tie serving top and bottom, like that can pinch on your release, and you go to release and you get a delayed release. Well, it may be fine when you're shooting in your flip-flops in your backyard, but then you're on a steep slope and you twist your hand a little bit and that release catches and doesn't go off, and you miss the buck that you've been after for days because of a mechanical failure. So there's also little tricks to setting up these bows, tying in things correctly where things don't move, and where you eliminate a lot of those problems before they ever happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, you definitely trying to get all these very small pieces of this big machine, trying to move in unison and trying to get everything to come together. It's a big part of the bow tuning puzzle, and it's just, like I said, it's just a process that I definitely enjoy.
Yep. Well, and if you don't know about it, it seems like a black magic, but it's really not that complicated with the bow. So we're going to walk through the process today. So when I get a new bow, first thing I do is I set a rest on it, and I try to set my rest so, the center of my arrow shaft is going right through the burger button hole, and then I want to tie in the back of my arrow square with my string. Is that where you start?
Yep. So I start all my setups. I start at 90 degrees. So I'll put my arrow on the string, put a level on it, and I'll start the level at 90 degrees. And I start my rest out usually about 13/16 from the riser shelf, and that's what I'll start my rest at.
Yeah, exactly. So left to right, that's where you're going, is 13/16 from the riser, from the edge of the riser to the center of your arrow, and then you're making your arrow come off your string. You say you're using a level, or you can use a square. I'm a carpenter. I just eyeball mine because it's just a starting point anyways. I want to see how it tunes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I use I just use an arrow level, so I'll put the arrow on the string. Like I said, there's a arrow level. I think Allen makes them. And it actually just has a little kind of like string or a little plunger on it, little spring plunger, and it clamps onto your arrow, and you manipulate it up and down your string, and once the bubble centers, obviously the arrow's at 90 degrees.
Yep. And then and like a lot of these are just preferences to setting up your bow that you learn over the years that work for you. But I know when I'm tying in a string loop, I definitely don't want a long string loop. And what I try to do is I thread it in with serving on the top and the bottom, and I leave just a little bit of room so it won't pinch my nock and try to pull my arrow up off the rest. And so I'm leaving it's maybe a 30-second, just a little wiggle room in there, and I'm tying serving top and bottom, and then I'm tying my string loop on there.
Yep, 100% agree with you. I tie nock loops on all my bows for that good nock fit. Nock fit on the string is really, really important to accuracy for sure. And I agree with you. I like to leave like a little razor blade. I'll usually use a razor blade to kind of get my spacing right on the nock, because you're right. You do not want that nock pinch at all, especially on the modern bows. I think you're shooting the triax this year, you were saying before.
Yes.
So, a lot of these bows that, have a smaller axle to axle length, obviously that string angle, the further you pull it back, whatever your draw length is, gets more and more acute. And you definitely don't want your D-loop knots pressing against your nock. So you definitely want a little bit of play in there. So those nock loops the little knocking points, serve knocking points, are definitely a benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because if it's too tight, like you're saying, it's pulling on that nock, and it's going to pull your arrow around as you come to full draw with that angle. And so therefore it can give you funny rips through paper and funny tuning.
Yep, I've seen people even with D-loops tied so tight. Well, or I guess they're not served. No loop or knock points are served in, and they have their string angle so acute that those knots are putting so much pressure on the nock. I've seen people draw back and their arrows kind of do wheelies off their rest. There's so much pinch on the back of that arrow.
Oh, yeah, that's what you don't want. You want it to come off that string clean. Yep. So, and then from there, I'll put a peep sight in, and I'll put my peep sight. My measurement's 5 3/4 from the center of my nock to the center of my peep sight, but everybody's a little bit different in the way they anchor.
Correct. And I do the same thing. I have mine's usually right about 6 inches. And I don't know if you measure yours. Are you talking measurement at full draw, your peep to the center of your arrow?
No, I measure it straight on the string.
Okay, got you. That can vary just a little bit. At least in my experiences, I've seen where that can vary. If you have your string at static and you measure from where your arrow is at, with the bow not drawn at static, to your peep sight, that can vary a little bit depending on axle to axle length. So I found the most consistent way, no matter what the axle to axle length is, whether I'm going from my 3D bow that's 37 inches axle to axle or my hunting bow at 33 inches axle to axle, it comes to about the same measurement. If you do it while you're drawing back, obviously you need a partner involved in this one, but you run your tape from the center of your peep to the center of your shaft at full draw, and obviously the height of your face is never really, obviously not going to change. So that's the most consistent way I've found to be able to measure a consistent spot for your peep sight.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. Yeah, the difference in string angles would change the height of your peep. And what I say too is, like, once you get your setup, like, shoot it and feel your shot and feel your anchor. And then, sometimes I'll adjust my peep a little up or a little down to either tighten up my anchor or loosen it up. And with a bow setup, like, it is super important that you have a comfortable anchor, but as you roll, like if you have a slider sight, like the farther you roll down your sight, the tighter your anchor gets to your face, and then the looser, the farther up it goes. And so, like, it's finding a happy medium with your sight in your home position, what feels normal and natural to you.
Yep, I completely agree. I usually, if I don't have a measurement on hand, or I don't know exactly how I'm going to feel with this sight or / peep setup, with the different sizes or different models of sight or whatnot, I usually, close my eyes and I'll draw back an anchor, 4 or 5 times with my eyes closed, open my eyes. And if I have good alignment, even then I'll usually tie my peep sight in just with kind of a temporary knot. And as I actually get outside, shoot with outside light and actually, adjust my slider to the bottom and shoot long distances and stuff like that, I usually end up moving my peep sight a little bit to accommodate those kinds of things, and then I'll permanently tie it in.
Oh yeah, that's a good move. Yeah, I'll leave I'll even leave mine in there loose and shoot with it a little bit and then move it. It doesn't seem to move in the string.
No, there's a lot of especially at static, there's a lot of tension on the string. It shouldn't move too much.
Yep. So yeah, and then as far as peep size, like for me, it's all about, and we talked about this earlier, but I line up my peep with my sight housing instead of centering the sight. I think it's a better way to go, to line it up with the housing. And so for me, my peep sight size is all about lining up my sight perfectly, that those two line up, it's going to be different in all lighting, but in most lighting, I want it to line up perfectly with my housing. So for me, I shoot like a 3/16, a 5/32, somewhere in there seems to work pretty good for me.
Yeah, no, I'm a housing centerer too. I'm definitely not a big fan of centering the pin. I know it works for some people. I'm not one of those people it works for. But actually, in my hunting bow right now, I'm running I don't actually have a dovetail mount on my sight. I actually am running a sight that's got a little bit shorter rail on it. So I'm actually running a quarter, and that eclipses my sight picture pretty well. But yeah, with those dovetail sights on most sliders nowadays, you can adjust that slider out, incrementally to perfectly eclipse with the peep sight that you feel comfortable running. Obviously, the narrower the peep sight, the smaller margin of error that you get in there. So ideally, yeah, you do, want to get a smaller peep if you can see through it. But, at the same time, having your sight way out does have a little bit of disadvantage too. So it all meets in the middle.
It does. Well, and I think you're right. Along with saying that a smaller peep is more accurate, the larger peep you can run is going to give you the most light in a hunting scenario. And so, like, I think maybe your draw length is just a touch longer than me. I don't have to run my sight all the way out, but I can't make that quarter fit mine. I've got too much airspace in there, and so that's why I've got to size down, is just to line up. But I bet you it's because you're a couple inches longer than I am.
Yeah, I shoot about a 29-inch draw length. I'm not sure where you sit.
26.5 to 27, depending on the bow.
Gotcha.
Yep.
That's probably your difference right there. Yeah, that does make a pretty big difference in sight picture for sure.
Yep. But I'm with you. You definitely want those two to line up. It's so important for shots, and especially as you start stepping back to longer yardages, that housing and that your peep, that they line up as good as they can. And different lighting, they are going to be different. If it's sunny, it's you're going to have more of a little halo around it, and if it's cloudy or overcast, it should fit about perfect or pretty tight.
Yeah, no, like I said, with my hunting bow, I'm running a 1/4 inch, and you alluded to it yourself. In hunting, you can go from a very, very wide variety of lighting situations, whereas like on my indoor bow, I know that I'm going to be in a well-lit inside room, and I run a 3/16 peep, with my sight bar extended, not quite as far as it'll go, but pretty close. So, it does. It depends a lot on what kind of lighting you're going to get in a given situation. And just for me, I know with a 1/4 inch peep, it doesn't matter if it's dawn or dusk, I'm going to be able to see through it without straining or having to really search for it.
Yep, I'm with you. So far we're pretty similar in our setups. So we got our rest on there. We've got our serving tied, or we've got our string loop tied in. We've got our peep in. Now we're gonna mount our sight to our bow. This is where I really pay attention to detail, is mounting my sight to my bow, and I know you do too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is a really crucial part of accuracy is setting up your sight, especially if you're running a slider sight like most of us out west, hunters obviously are.
Yeah, and so what you got to do is you got to set your axles on your sight. You want to set your first axle, or your first axis on your bow. Like what I try to do is I try to level my bow first. So I'll put it on a 4-foot level in a door jamb. So you're going to get some redneck tuning here, Gabe. You're going to like this. But I put it in a door jamb on a 4-foot level, and what I'm trying to level is each pocket of my limbs. And once I have my bow totally level, then what I do is I take a bullet level and I throw a level on my sight housing. And usually your sight housing will have a flat spot right there where you can set that right on your sight and be able to adjust it to get your sight housing perfectly level.
Yep, I start out with a pretty similar process. I have a bow. I have a bow vise at home, so I'm kind of lucky in that regard. So I'll put my bow in the vise, and I have a string level that I'll clip onto the string that actually will show again a bubble level, and then as a secondary level, either on usually the cable slide or the string stop, because usually those are pretty perfectly level as well. And I'll clip the same one that I use for the arrow onto either the cable guard or the string stop, just as two points of reference to make sure that bow is sitting in that vise level up and down wise, I suppose, vertically.
Yep, that makes sense.
And then that's where I'll put my sight leveler onto my on my slider sight. It's I'll put it on the rail in which the sight housing slides up and down. I'll find a nice flat spot to mount it on there. And then usually, it's very, very rare that I throw that on there, and the first axis is actually money from the start. So, even on that sight level, the bubble will either be, obviously a little to the right or a little to the left, and I'll adjust that. And, usually I'll call that my first axis.
Yep. Yeah, so that's exactly. I level my bow, I level the sight housing or the rail. I think I'm the same way. Level the rail, and then I'll also level the bubble inside the sight to make sure that's level. And what you're doing is You're taking away any left or right misses. You're just ensuring that your slider sight, or even if you're shooting like a multiple pin sight, you're ensuring that the top pin and the bottom pin are in line, so you don't get any left or right misses. So it's a crucial step to setting up a sight that really helps remedy, that it's getting through that and setting it correctly, and then you don't have problems later.
It is. I've seen a lot of people come into a shop with the problem that, hey, I have my bow sighted in, and at 20 and 30 yards, I'm hitting dead middle, but as I go out to 50, 60, 70, 80, however many yards, I'm shooting further to the left, and I can't figure out why. And most people think it's a tuning issue or a rest issue, and 9 times out of 10, I've been able to level the bow up, throw a sight leveler on there, and see that their first axis is off to the left, causing that increasingly further left arrow the further distance they go out. Obviously, with that slider, if your sight rail is canted to the left, obviously as you move your sight down that rail, the bubble level in the sight itself is still going to say it's level, but it's actually sloping down to that left side.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I'm the same process. So once I get that set up, I wait to set I wait to set up hills and steep shots until later. I just get my sight on there and I make sure my axes are right. And then for me, I've shot enough downhill that I know my third axis. I know I have to crank the sight all the way to the left. And so I just move mine there, but I proof it later on my third axis to make sure, I'm good up and downhill. And that's a really tough one to explain on the podcast. I've heard it with hinges of a door, but basically, as you start to aim downhill, even though everything was set up on your first axis correctly, as you lean downhill, you start shooting to the right. And so you have to adjust that, or it could be to the left too. It's all about your grip and how the bow aims down. But definitely shooting in steep country, it's really important that you test that.
Yeah, 100%, and especially out west where we do the majority of our hunting. It's very, very rare, at least in my cases, where it seems like I get a perfectly level shot. So you're definitely going to be shooting up or shooting down, and you definitely want your sight to show you that you're holding true level when that shot arises.
Yep. And there's ways you can test it and kind of set it, by hanging a string, and then,
that's the way I do it.
Okay.
I hang a string.
Yep. So you can hang a string, and then you can draw back. You can make sure your 20 and your 60 pin are on it, and then you lean down. You still make sure that, your pins line up on that string, but you'll find as you start aiming down that you'll have to move your axis a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And I keep the sight level on the rail itself just to kind of, reassure myself that everything's still in line. So if I can draw up that string and my sight level shows level, and then I look back and the when I'm saying the sight level, I guess I mean the bubble that's actually built into the sight itself, whereas the sight leveler that I've put on to check my axes, I'll look back at it just to make sure that's still showing level as well.
Oh, that makes sense. So you're not canting your bow as you're aiming down the string.
Correct. So I have 2 points of reference. So if my integrated bubble level is showing level and the mounted sight level that I have on is also showing level, it's just a reassurance on my part saying that my system is in line.
Yep. Yeah, and then I just always like to proof it too. It's you'd hate to get a shot and execute a money shot and have something go wrong on your bow and end up hitting that animal left or right. That'd just be horrible.
No, absolutely. So I do a lot of with my hunting bow. I mean, obviously I do a lot of competitive 3D tournaments and stuff like that I will take a target bow to, but I try to make time definitely out of my schedule, especially at least local shoots, to take my hunting bow so I can get out and shoot steep angles up and down at 3D targets, again, just like you were saying, to kind of proof my leveling.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And okay, so we've got the sight on there now. Most guys are shooting a slider sight. How do you sight in your slider sight?
Well, I actually try to get as much range as I can out of my slider sight, just because I like to practice a little bit further out than I would actually usually shoot in a hunting scenario. So what I'll do is I'll adjust my sight itself as high up on the bow as I can, and try to get a 20 mark is, usually my first mark on my slider sight, 20 yards, like most people's first pin on a fixed pin sight, so that I can get the most amount of arrow clearance out of it. I try to, like I said, make that 20 mark as close to the top as I can.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, if it's a multi-pin slider, like I shoot, a 5-pin slider, so I've got my 20 through 60 all the time when I'm at my 60 home position. I make my lowest pin, my 60 is my mover pin, and I can reel that up to 20 or down as low as it goes until it hits the arrow. But yeah, I kind of adjust my 60 pin just off the level a little bit, enough to where I can aim at an animal really well, and then kind of set my pins from there.
I wasn't sure if you shot a multi-pin or a single pin. I actually do shoot a multi-pin on my hunting setup as well. It's a 3-pin, so I have 20 through 40 heads up, and that's actually a great point that you made. I also try to lower my pins a little bit in the sight housing, just so I don't have to look up to try to catch my pins, and then kind of try to look back down to catch my level. So I do try to because even if your sight housing and your peep sight eclipse really, really well, most times if those pins sit a little bit higher in the sight itself, you kind of catch yourself having to look up at the pins and look down at the level just to kind of reaffirm yourself. So I do try to get those pins a little bit lower in the housing just so I can keep a steady watch on both my pins and my level in my shot sequence.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't really think about that. But yeah, you almost want to see your level. You want to see your level as you're aiming, to where you don't have to look, back up at your pin and down at your level. Yeah, that's a really good point. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, just something I picked up. I have no idea where I even heard it. It definitely wasn't something I came up with on my own, but just somewhere down the line, I'd heard that somebody did that and thought, man, that makes a lot of sense. So I've been doing it ever since.
Oh, isn't it amazing when you're hunting in the mountains and you go to draw back and how out of level your bow can be? Like on a hillside, you look at it and then you've got to lean way over. It feels like you're leaning off the mountain, but it's so wild, like how important that level is in steep country.
Oh, it's insanely crucial. It's like I said, especially as with more distance. The more distance you add, the more crucial it is. I mean, if you have even just your sight being a little bit out of level on the second or third axis, I mean, at a shot like 60 or 70 yards, that could translate to as much as 10 inches either way.
Yeah, easy. Yeah, I'm with you.
More.
Yeah, and I play with my bubble a lot, like in the wind. I'll lean my bubble all the way into the wind, and I learn how to shoot that way so I can compensate for the wind drift my arrow's getting, because I live in a windy spot. And so, you're trying to hit the middle of the target, but I'll lean and camp my bow all the way over till the level hits the side, and then it'll shoot right in the middle with wind drift. So I play around with that too.
That's actually really interesting. And a lot of the pros that I've talked to on the 3D circuit, when we talk about shooting in windy situations, there's two ways to go about it. And it sounds like you're a bubble in person. So one of the ways is you hold your pin still on what you want to hit and you bubble into the wind. And it seems to be a 50-50 split. It seems like most of the pros, they either do want to hold their pin on what they're trying to hit and bubble, what they call bubbling into the wind, or they, try to level their sight and then hold off a little bit of distance to, kind of have their arrow, or it's not so much their arrow is, arrow diameters are so thin nowadays. They're not, as affected by the wind, but more or less to give yourself a little bit of play to get your bow pushed around. But that's interesting that you bubble into the wind. I do the same thing.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's such a great tool. It's amazing how much you can account for. And, even with these thin diameter arrows, I still get quite a bit of wind drift, and especially as you start getting out to the 50, 60, 70 range, that you can get a foot of wind drift. I mean, is about a 5 mile an hour wind or an 8 mile an hour wind. I mean, it's crazy how far that thing will drift. It's with the fletchings and with the broadhead and with the arrow and the whole deal. Like, I can get quite a bit of drift out of mine if I got full value.
Oh yeah. Fletchings and broadheads will definitely play into that a lot. As far as wind drift goes, you're absolutely right there.
Yep. Okay, so where are we at? We've got our rest on, we've got our string loop tied in, we've got our sight on. We've talked about sighting in our sight, but we haven't tuned our bow. So I go through, like, after I get everything mounted on, and the first thing I want to do is shoot the bow and wearing the string a little bit, and I'm trying to get my peep to open up perfectly for me. And it seems like, your nock will wear a groove right there, and also, your peep will rotate a little bit as the string stretch. So I want to shoot a few shots, and I want to get my peep so when I draw back, it's completely 90 degrees to my eye open.
Yep, nope, that's a big thing, is kind of training your string in essence to bring the peep sight back to the angle that you want it at. That's definitely something that everybody setting up a new bow fights for at least a little while. You also brought up something interesting too with the nock groove. I don't know. I might have caught that wrong, but at least with my setups, I don't know if you've ever tried it, but if you nock an arrow and you grab your serving, kind of above and below, even with your nock points tied in and your D loop on, you actually should be able to turn your string side to side with your arrow nocked, and your arrow should still basically stay on the rest. Like if you grab your string and you twist it right to left, or clockwise and counterclockwise, however you want to look at it, you actually want your nock to fit loose enough in there to where the arrow doesn't want to go left or right. It kind of just wants to stay where it's at.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. It doesn't really wear a groove so much in there. I guess that's what I stated, but it kind of, like the string gets memory, and so you want to keep on that peep to make sure that you got everything rotating right so it's opening correctly. And it seems like it seems like after you shoot that bow a little bit, it has its spot, and then if you go twisting strings, it moves quite a bit. And so, like, I usually twist from the bottom since my peep sight's further away, and so those twists have smaller movements onto the peep, and then try to get it so it's opening to 90 degrees, which is usually facing away from you when your string is lax just a little bit, right?
Yep. I find the same thing usually.
Yep. So you want to set that peep so it's opening correctly, kind of wear in your strings, and just get the few shots or the first few shots out of that bow. And then I pull out the paper tuner is how I go about tuning mine. And my favorite method, do it from multiple different distances, and I shoot through paper, and I'm really trying to find the most forgiving rip I can. I mean, you definitely want a bullet hole every shot, but you'll find that you get a little left rip or a little right rip, or, you definitely want to test more than one arrow to shooting in there, and you want to get the best, most consistent rip closest to a bullet hole you can get with every shot.
Yep. I completely agree there. I start out with paper tuning too. So usually what I'll do is once I have my arrow picked out, and that's, I don't know if you want to dive into arrows separately, because usually in my order of things, once I get everything kind of set up, my next thing is kind of plotting my arrow length and spine and stuff like that. But if we just want to talk about tuning right now, what I do is, like I said, just like you, I paper tune my bow, but I'll paper tune it really, really close. Like I'm talking probably about 3 feet. And the reason I'm so close to the paper is I actually don't want the arrow to really oscillate, because I'm not at that distance. I'm not so concerned about necessarily what the arrow is doing, because as long as it's not grossly overspined or grossly underspined, nothing crazy, the arrow's not going to have time, because it's, I'm at 30 inches away from the bow. It really just barely got off the string. It's not really going to have time to shimmy or oscillate. So what I'm trying to figure out there is if the bow likes where everything's set. So if I get a tear that close, it has something to do with like cam timing, maybe tiller, knock point height, or the rest isn't, quite center with where the bow wants to cast the arrow. So that first close rip is more telling me what my bow is doing, opposed to what the arrow's doing.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, and I mean, you're right. Like, the arrow choice makes such a big difference in how that bow shoots. So I think we can dive into it a little bit with spine and length. Like, I think it'd be a good thing to touch on, because I know when I'm building my bow, like, that's the first thing I'm doing is looking at my arrow cut, and I'm trying to get that arrow spine perfectly so it reacts perfectly with the bow I'm shooting.
Yep, and this is kind of just something I've done over the years. I shoot an ACC arrow, so I don't know if if this is definitely kind of at your own risk with carbon shafts. But what I usually do starting off my build with my arrows is I use hot melt, a really, really low temperature hot melt, and I'll start my arrow shaft a little bit longer than I think I need. And I'll glue in my insert there with, like I said, really, really low temperature hot melt. And I'll play with lengths and point weights from there and try to establish, kind of what shaft is working for me. If I get a tear that indicates that, the arrow length or the arrow's a little underspined, I can play with point weight, or, usually underspined. I can cut a little bit more off the arrow shaft, which I kind of planned on doing anyway, being that I started out with the arrow a little bit longer than I thought I needed. So usually that's my first go-to, is if I get a tear that's indicative of a arrow that's a little underspined, I'll go to, and cut a 1/2 inch to 1 inch off of it, put the insert back in with hot melt, and shoot it again, and, kind of manipulate the arrow length / stiffness from there.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good way to go about it. Gosh, I use that archer's advantage, and I just like dummy in my numbers in there, my point weight, my poundage, and kind of enter it all in there, and then it kind of tells me, like in a 400 spine, this is the perfect cut, the perfect reaction. I've just had really good luck with it, and so, I really haven't messed with it that much other than just plugging my numbers in, cutting the shaft, and then really liking how it reacts to the bow and trusting the system. So I use that Archer's Advantage, that computer program. There's so many cool things you can do, enter in all my information, and then I look at the spine and try to cut. And I'm trying to shoot the shortest arrow I can. So I want to shoot it just an inch past my rest, or the shorter your arrow, the less wind drifts it's going to get, no matter what your draw length is. And so for me, I always try to shoot like a shorter arrow or as small, as weak a spine as I can, for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Archer's Advantage is a great program, and it gives you great information. I think it's just the kind of tinkering part of my brain that, like, I want to come to these deductions, on my own, and I want to try to cut, even quarter inches here and there just to, in my mind, it very, very well might be placebo, but in my mind, like, I've done everything. I've tried everything. I've tried all the point weights. I've tried all the lengths. I know that this is what's working, Yeah,
it makes sense. Yep. So from there, like, once we have our arrow and we found one that's reacting good to our bow, we found our cut, and we start shooting. So we're paper tuning. You said you start at 3 feet and then you work back from there.
Yep. So like I said, I'll start at 3 feet, and like I said, with the arrow having such a short distance from being out of the bow to the paper, it really, like I said, unless it's grossly underspined, it really doesn't have time to oscillate. So the rip that you might get through paper at that distance isn't usually going to be an arrow problem. It's more, like I said, the bow being, what your bow is doing as a system. So like I said, your cams could be out of sync. You could just be torquing the grip. That, you definitely have to, be cognizant of that you're not putting a ton of torque on your grip. It could be, like I said, the rest isn't perfectly in line for where that bow wants to shoot down the center. It could be tiller. It could be a number of things, but like I said, mostly that rules out for me the arrow movement, and that just tells me, okay, something in the bow as a system is kind of awry. So like I said, I'll check my timing on my draw board, make sure my cams are timed good. If that's not the issue, I'll check my grip, shoot it again. Okay, still got the same tear, so it's probably not my grip. So at that point, I'll move the rest, but I'll move the rest within reason. I don't like to go too far out of that, like I said, that 13/16 where I start. I'll go as much as, I'd say, maybe up to a quarter of an inch either way, but I feel like anything beyond that is kind of unacceptable. Like, there's no reason that the bow should want to shoot, essentially a bullet hole with the rest being that far out of what I think is center. So if that's still the case, and I move it a quarter inch whichever way, and it's still wanting to shoot that bullet hole, that's when I go to yoke tuning, and I'll twist my yokes up, because that's essentially, that just might be, with us being humans, obviously, we're all imperfect and we have a different grip. Everybody's going to hold their bow just a little bit differently. So usually what that indicates to me is not necessarily am I over torquing the bow, but just for whatever reason, that bow, whether it's the grip, the way the riser is, whatever it is, or the stabilizer system that I choose to use, I'm making that bow shoot a little bit further right or left in the way that I'm holding the bow. So rather than, like I said, shifting my rest out to a spot that's, definitely way out of center, I'll try to counteract my own torque with yoke tuning.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, once you find a good grip, you don't adjust your grip to make it shoot through paper. You adjust your bow. And so, like you're saying, and when you were going to say a quarter inch, yeah, I was thinking even less than that. Like, I want that arrow to be in the power path of the string, and so I want that thing to be in the center of my grip. So you're right. If it starts going out too far, then you mess with your cam lean or your yoke tuning that you're talking about, and all you're doing is where your Y yoke goes up and attaches to the limb. You're putting more twists in it or less twists, and you're pulling that cam and leaning that cam so that bow will tune differently.
Correct. And with a lot of the bows, like Matthews, for the most part, I think even all of their bows now have a floating yoke system. But Matthews, one thing I really like about their system is that they have that top hat system, which is essentially a cam shim. Now you do have to put your bow in a bow press and take the cams off and stuff like that. But as far as I know, Matthews is actually one of the only floating yoke systems that actually have other than just kind of getting spacers and kind of putting them in where they fit. Matthews is the only one that kind of has a really I guess methodical way of being able to shim that cam lean one way or the other to kind of accomplish the same goal.
Yeah, so like a floating yoke is where it doesn't attach to the limb. It floats like on the string, and so you can't do any cam lean. So the first time I got a Matthews in my hand, I'm like, well, how the heck do I change the tune on this thing? So yeah, I end up taking it apart, and you can change the shims to move the cam positioning, which will then make that bow tune farther inside or farther outside. I can't remember switching the shims. So yeah, some bows you have to do that as well to change the tune of the bow where you can't yoke tune. Yep. And then as you're shooting through, like you're moving the rest in small increments, you're figuring out your rip and you're trying to get it to shoot a bullet hole. And then sometimes if you can't get a high or low tear out of there and you see your arrow really starting to lean downhill or uphill, then that's when you tiller tune your bow. That's where and all the tiller tune is you're changing the distance from the string to the riser, either on the low side or the high side. The way you do that is by lessening the tension on that limb, so giving it a half turn on your limb bolt or a full turn on your limb bolt. So what you're doing is you're turning your bottom limb out while your top limb is staying in all the way. That'll adjust your tiller tune and also adjust the way that arrow tunes through paper.
Yep. And it's honestly with most modern bows nowadays, it seems like most companies have really kind of got the limb bolt, kind of the limb bolt / pocket really down pat by now. It's not very often anymore that I've had to tiller tune a bow of mine or a friend's bow as long as they're a fairly new model. It seems like I said most manufacturers kind of have that down these days, but it is a possibility of something that you might have to adjust.
Yeah, well, and it also depends. Like every bow has its own personality, right? Two can come off the factory, but they can tune totally different. And so
100%.
Yeah, so sometimes you just get a bow that you keep getting a low tear in it, and like you can either fight it to death or you can turn that bottom limb bolt out a half a turn and then it shoots a bullet hole. So it's definitely a good tuning secret to know.
Yeah, a lot of my buddies that I do know that shoot on the Pro 3D circuit. They just about every event they go to, they carry two bows just in case they have some sort of failure, some sort of catastrophic failure with one bow. You're not completely out of the tournament. But every single one of them will tell you that even though you have two of the exact same bows with the exact same sight, with the exact same rest, the exact same arrow, the exact same string, exact same everything. I mean, two clones of the the same bow, that one will never tune the same way as the other.
It's so funny. Yeah, I guess that's where some of the black magic comes from, right? Because they all have their own personality. They all want to shoot a certain way.
Absolutely. I completely concur there.
Mm-hmm. So we've got our arrows figured out. We've got things adjusted. We haven't moved our rest too far. We've tiller tuned if we have to. Another thing that we didn't mention that you always want to check is your timing of your cams. And you're just basically making sure that your cams are rotating at the same time. And I know some guys like to have their cams a little forward or a little back, but for me in my hunting setup, like I tend to set it to where both the stops on my cams hit and leave the string at the exact same time. How do you set up yours, Gabe?
Yep, I'm usually the same way. 9 times out of 10, I like my bow to shoot with the stops touching at the exact same time. I kind of have a home fashioned draw board that me and my dad built years ago, and I've used for a long time. But it's just essentially a metal tee, that's got a post for where the handle goes through, on a crank with a belt. I hook the hook to my D-loop, crank it on back, and like I said, once I get real close to the stops, I have a little, I guess like swivel screw that I can tighten up just, maybe another ½ inch, and I'll just slowly turn it, tighten it up until those stops hit, and I'll just make sure that they are hitting at the exact same time. That's usually good enough for me. Some people go as far as to creep tune their bows, and I don't know if anybody's, I'm sure a lot of people have heard the term creep tuning, and what that is that so you shoot your bow, once it's all perfectly tuned, you'll shoot your bow at your normal anchor with your normal tension, everything, and you'll shoot at a vertical line on a target, whether it's a plumb bob or you use a marker or tape or what have you to make a perfectly straight vertical line. I usually use a plumb bob because I'm definitely not the contractor type. I can't draw a straight line seemingly to save my life, so I let gravity do it for me. But what you do is you shoot, and obviously you want your arrow, it should be, right down the middle of that axis. And then what you'll do with creep tuning is you'll take one shot where you pull against your wall as hard as you humanly can, basically trying to pull the guts out of your bow and have a shot go off. And you want that, obviously you want that arrow to stay in the center line as well. And then you'll try to get soft where you're basically shooting that bow right off the stops for a second shot. And you want that arrow right in the center. And I said vertical line, and I totally apologize. I meant a horizontal line for creep tuning. Because you want to be on the bottom or top side of the line. Oh. So essentially, if when you pull the guts out of your bow or you shoot it soft on the stops, if your arrow wants to be on the high side of your of the line, it's usually your top cam, or your bottom cam is a little bit hot on the stop, and again vice versa. So if you shoot on the low side of the line, it's usually your top cam's a little hot on the stop. So that's another way of doing it, but I just personally, I stick to my draw board. I'm able to crank it real slow and make a real minute adjustment to make sure those stops are hitting at the same time.
Oh, that's really interesting. Like I think I have to do that to my indoor bow. It seems like when I pull really hard on it, I'm getting high misses.
Yep, and that very well could be too. It depends a lot on the stop too, the kind of stop you have, whether you have cable stops, limb stops. Kind of like one of those Bomar stops that actually take a ton of the surface area of the cable. So, a lot of that is a little bit dependent on the kind of stop you have, especially when you're on that real tight shot. But more or less, when you're in a really, kind of nerve-wracking situation, whether it be on the target line or in a hunting situation, in my opinion, it seems like I'm more prone to collapse and get soft because I'm trying to aim too much than I am to try to just pull like I said, the guts out of my bow. So I'm more concerned about whether or not, if I give it a little bit, if I collapse a little bit, what it's doing. So I put a little bit more validity, at least in my setup, when I'm soft on the stops, and could make adjustments from there. But like I said, usually I usually stick to my draw board.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Well, and my problem is I get late in my shot and I keep pulling, and I think I'm putting more tension on my bow and pulling hard against the stops, like harder than when the shot just breaks normally, But yeah, that's really interesting. But I'm the same way. I don't tinker with it too much. I pretty much set them to where they leave the string at the same, and I tend to get pretty good arrow flight out of it, and so that's how I roll too.
Yep. And then usually just to kind of check, my tune on my hunting bow, I kind of do a version of walkback tuning. With my 3D bow, I definitely do a walkback tune after I'm done paper tuning, because I do the same thing like you were talking about, is paper tuning at different distances. And the different distances, like I said, kind of tell me different things about my system as a whole. Like I said, that really, really close shot will kind of tell me what my bow's doing. And then that really, really, and not when I say really, really far shot, I guess I mean like, the 15-foot shot, into paper, more tells me about what the arrow's doing. So I'll make adjustments to my arrow from there. But I definitely do use a little bit of walkback tuning for my target bows. And then and I obviously broadhead tune my hunting bow, which is essentially the same, at least the way I do it. It's essentially the same thing as a walkback tune with my hunting bow. Is I'll shoot my field points up close with my broadheads, and obviously if I can get them to group up close, that's a good starting point. Usually they do. I shoot a mechanical broadhead 9 times out of 10 anyway, so there's not a ton of drag difference or anything like that. But then I'll go to a distance like say 40 yards, and I'll shoot my field point with my broadhead. And I'll use my rest actually to reel my broadhead in on the horizontal plane with my field point. So I'll kind of, manipulate my rest. We're talking minute movements, very, very small, because a dab will do you, especially at, 40 and 50 yards, to bring my broadhead in hit with my field point. And because I mean, if you can make your broadhead group with your field point, I mean you definitely aren't going to fluke that one. Whereas you can get a fluke paper tear sometimes, a couple times, and you think you've got a perfect bullet hole going through paper. But if you can get a broadhead to shoot about the same with a field point, because obviously after a little while, if you start talking like 80 and 90 yards, obviously just the ballistic drag on a broadhead is going to start to make that broadhead fall off the target a little bit faster than the field point. But if you can make your broadheads group with your field points, like I said, in that 40 to 50 yard mark, your system as a whole is casting that arrow straight.
Yeah, no, that is the tell. That's why we're going through all the work of tuning and paper tuning at different distances, so you step out with your broadheads and they hit right in the group. And you're right, that's like the last step for me too, is I want to shoot my broadheads with my field points. And even expandables, as aerodynamic as they are, they still will fly out of a bow different. And so they'll start grouping to the left or low, of your field points. Usually once I have my bow set up, I go out and they hit right in the group. And like you say, I may have to adjust it just minor at like 60 yards. They may be hitting a little left, but you just want to move your rest then and then re-sight in and then shoot. But yeah, your broadheads to your field points and how they're flying and grouping together, that's the ultimate tell of your tuning and how your arrows are leaving your bow.
Exactly. You should never really have to fight your broadheads as far like on the vertical plane, just because if you're shooting a 100 grain broadhead and a 100 grain field point, your arrow should weigh the exact same. So as long as your bow is properly tuned to begin with, like I said, you should never get a variation up and down with your broadheads. It's always going to be a horizontal, deviation. So, like I said, as long as you can bring the broadheads in with the field points, like I said, you definitely know that your system as a whole is working. And you did bring up a good point there. Is even though most people shoot expandables, and that's one thing that kills me. That's kind of a little, I guess, industry kind of peeve of mine. Is a lot of these companies, put on the box of broadheads, field point accurate, or something to that effect. And no matter what, if you have exposed blade area, no matter how small it is, at some point physics dictates that that's going to cause drag, and eventually when your arrow starts to decelerate at longer distances, you're going to notice that drag.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's interesting, Gabe. I just want to circle back to that broadhead. You were saying that you only do it on the horizontal line, that the vertical line, that your broadhead should hit the same because they weigh the same. But don't you think if your arrow is coming out with a low tear, then that broadhead catches that low tear and ends up, making that broadhead hit low or hit eye the way your bow's tuned?
Oh yeah, no, 100%. Oh,
okay.
Sorry about that. Yep. Yeah, like I said, I was just talking under the presumption that you have that, through paper tuning, that you have that arrow flying, money out of your bow. You definitely know that there's not a horizontal deviation with your setup, that your broadheads, being that they're the same weight as your field point arrow, should impact the same on the vertical axis.
Copy. I understand. Okay, I heard you wrong or took that the wrong way. But yeah, I understand what you're saying now. Yeah, I think you're right. And they do, like you say, put that on the box as field point accuracy. They're just not. They just react different. They're also more finicky. It's tougher to shoot a tight group with your broadheads than it is your field points, and not by much, but a little bit.
Yeah, no, 100%. And they are a little bit. They're a broadhead, obviously, because it has those exposed blade surfaces. I don't know why I can't say exposed today. Those exposed blade surfaces, they are less forgiving just by nature, because they do have, they're not as aerodynamically sound as a field point. So you do, for just, whereas you might get away with a little bit of movement or a little bit of wind push with a field point, you're not going to get away with it with a broadhead, obviously for aerodynamic reasons. Them just not being as forgiving, because they do have, no matter how small, they do have a little bit of sail on the front of the arrow now. So, it's kind of a whole different beast. They're definitely a lot more finicky, like you said.
Yep, absolutely. So it's just a good thing to practice with broadheads in dang near every group you're shooting as you're getting close to hunting season, and even switching, half of your arrows to broadheads, just because they react just a little bit different, and you want to make sure that you're shooting your broadheads as that's what you're shooting at an animal. Yep,
absolutely. And I actually, when I I suppose this is probably a couple steps behind that I'm kind of circling back to now, but one of the things that I try to keep in mind too when I'm deciding what broadhead to go with, whatever year it might be, I'm definitely somebody who likes to tinker with broadheads too. It seems like I shoot a different broadhead just about every year. But I try to get a vane setup that actually, matches that broadhead as best I can. If I'm trying a fixed blade or something with a lot of area exposed, I mean, obviously I'm going to need a bigger vane to kind of correct that, or maybe a fourth vane instead of 3 vanes, something to try to, get that bow to give the control of the arrow back to the rear end of the arrow where you want the control to come from. So my vane choice actually has a lot to do with my broadhead choice as well.
Oh, that's a really good point. Yep. The more steering the bigger your broadhead on the front, the more air it catches. It's like having fletchings on the front of your arrow, and that's going to try to control that arrow. So therefore, the bigger the blades and the bigger the surface, the bigger your fletchings in the back, like you said, to take control of that arrow and steer it to the target.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Yep. But there is, a point of diminishing returns. You obviously don't want too big of arrows or too big of vanes with maybe too gnarly of a helical or something like that, because that with the broadhead up front creates even more drag, and you'll start to really notice that your arrows fall off the map when you're talking about distances, and that is something that could absolutely cause a deviation on the vertical axis when you're trying to group tune your broadheads with your field points. Is the amount of drag that the increased amount obviously on the front of the arrow with the broadhead, the exposed blades, but also just in general, you actually want as small of a vane almost as you can get away with, just on a drag standpoint, so that you don't start to lose lose speed at the further distances, because like I said, the bigger vane that you have, the gnarlier helical, the more that arrow is going to want to fall out of the sky. But also on a noise factor, I don't remember, who brought this up to me, but somebody had mentioned to me that that they think that more animals jump, when we say, the animal jumped my string, a lot of people somebody once told me that it was their belief that it's not so much the bow that the animal hears going off, especially, at 50, 60 yards on a slightly breezy day, but it's more so the arrow that they hear coming at them. So obviously the bigger fletchings that you have on the back with the bigger broadhead, with the more helical, the more that arrow is going to hiss coming through the air.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, and you talk a wind drag, so you're slowing your arrow down, so you're not getting as much energy down range, and your pin gapping's getting farther and farther apart, but also the wind drift. Out west, yep, we always have a wind. In the bigger fletchings you're shooting, the more wind drift you're going to get. And wind drift, like we were talking earlier, can push your arrow a long ways off the mark. And so, that's also why you want to shoot the smallest vanes you can that will steer your broadhead correctly. So it's a fine line with archery. You can go too far one way pretty easily over the line,
Oh yeah, either way, like I said, there's points of diminishing return on both ends of the spectrum. Too big, too small, too light, too heavy. No matter which it is, there's definitely a fine line in the middle where you definitely want to stick.
Yep. And then from there, so we've got our bows shooting pretty good. They're tuned good. They're shooting broadheads good. Of course, we make up our sight tape, and we do that by making a mark at 20 and then making a mark at 60, matching up a sight tape to it. Then you test that sight tape or proof it down to the longer distances you shoot, make sure that everything's on and you can get it adjusted correctly. And then I run stabilizers on my hunting bow. Do you run stabilizers on yours?
Yeah, actually on my hunting bow, I'm actually running a quivalizer. I've ran that for a couple years now, and I actually really do like it, just because, obviously out west we don't really usually have the luxury of, being able to take our quiver off and hang it up somewhere, like a lot of people in the whitetail woods do. So if I'm going to have the weight of my quiver and my arrows on my bow, I like the idea of them, kind of providing functional weight. And what I mean by that is that, the arrows being on the non-accessory side of my bow kind of offset the weight of my, my sight and my rest and things on the accessory side of my bow.
Nice. Yeah, I see a lot of guys go into those, and you're right. You have the weight of your arrows on there anyways. You might as well have it working for you. And I go with like a tight spot quiver on that side. I like the weight, and then I like to fine tune my weight. I use a 12-inch front stabilizer and a 12-inch sidebar, and then I can kind of play with my weights and play with my reaction on my bow a little bit more. But it comes down to preference. I definitely see a lot of guys go into those.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And on my indoor bow and my 3D bow, obviously I'm running, stabilizers on, a 30-inch bar out front with a 12 to 15-inch bar on the back, obviously with adjustable weights, just because I'm trying to get that bow to hold as absolute pinpoint as I can to whether I'm trying to shoot a Vegas X or a 12 ring on a 3D target. And not that I'm not trying to split hairs with my hunting bow, but I guess I'm struggling for a better way to describe it, but you just, with the weight of the arrows that you have to lug around and the weight of the quiver that you have to lug around anyway, I just don't see, at least in my setup, I don't see enough of a benefit for me, with a 1/4-inch peep sight, shooting a non-magnified sight with 3 pins, on a slider. I guess I just don't see the accuracy returns, at least for me I didn't. Running a weighted stabilizer setup. So, the equivalizer made sense to me.
Yeah, and like you say, it just comes down to preference and how your bow reacts and how you can get that weight on that equivalizer and get it set right. So, man, I'm with you. It all comes down to preference. I get a lot of benefit out of mine by adjusting weights on the front and back, to help with the hold and hold as good as I can, but also to help with the reaction of the bow. Like if I'm getting low hits, that I can pull weight off the front of my stabilizer, put some on the back, and that seems to take a lot of my low hits out. So, like I say, it's to each their own, and yeah, I see some benefit in it, or like you say, it may even be placebo, but I like tinkering with bows, so yeah, I mess with it a little bit and think I get some benefit anyways.
And you very well might. And even if, like you said, it is a placebo, I mean, archery is such a mental game that if you think that your setup is the cat's meow and that it's going to hit where you point that pin, that arrow's probably going to go where you point that pin, as long as it's, obviously well tuned and everything else. But, it's a very mental sport. If you go into any shot, whether it's paper, foam, or an animal, and if you go into that shot with the slightest doubt that you're going to miss, more than likely you're going to miss.
Yeah, oh, you're so right. Yeah, I could use some placebo in the hills, like just walking around with that belief in your bow that you can make that shot. That confidence is so powerful.
It really is. Like I said, archery is a super, super mental game.
Yeah. Well, and, you get these bows all set up, and then, it's important for me to continue to shoot through season, and I love shooting at the trailhead. Like, if I got a target in my truck or I'm hunting, I love to just proof it because, bows, we've got strings on there. They react different to different temperatures. Maybe the humidity or elevation if you're hunting high elevation. And so for me to walk around with that ultimate confidence, like I want to send an arrow before I walk out on the hunt, and it's not always possible, but I try to always have a target in my truck, and if I ever get any downtime, or if I can right before I'm leaving the trailhead, I love to fire a few arrows downrange and go, yep, she's on.
100%, I'm with you there. Every hunt I go on, I try to have a target in the back of my truck, and same thing. Before I hit the trail, I'm definitely putting 1 or 2 arrows down there. And when I say 1 or 2, it could be 3 or 4, but I mean, if I shoot a money shot that I feel like I held good, the release broke good, and that arrow ends up in the center, that's what I want to end on. Like, yep, I'm going up the mountain with that image in my mind. Like, that arrow hit perfect center, we're good.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Yeah. So yeah, always good to proof your bows. And it's just like the more time you spend on that hunting setup, just the more confidence you're going to have in it, the more forgiving setup you're going to make. So, if you do make a slight mistake in your form, or, it's so tough in the mountains when you're shooting, just the downhill angles, or your feet are uneven. It's just so different than being in flip-flops in the backyard, So, I just like to spend a lot of time on my setup and get it shooting as absolutely as good as I can, and then walk around in the hills with confidence, knowing I can make that shot.
No, absolutely. And like I said, I try to make time. I mean, obviously I'm going to go to real competitive shoots 3D shoots during the year with my target bow, as I'm trying to compete in them. But like I said, I definitely make time to try to go to more hunting-based 3D shoots, whereas whether it's a local shoot or maybe the Total Archery Challenge or something like that, to where I can put my feet on uneven ground, on a mountain, at elevation, at least some elevation. And another big thing is that, you can take your bow and practice your hunting bow. You can take your hunting bow and practice in the backyard all you want, shooting at a block target or whatever you have, but it's usually a spot on a target. Whether it's a red dot or a black dot or whatever, you're still shooting at a circle on a target. Whereas I'm a big believer in practicing how you play. And I think, obviously animals for the most part don't walk around with spots on their vitals. So for me, it really is important to try to shoot at something that, is going to be like what I'm going to shoot at in the mountains, like I said, just because, and you can talk to a lot of competitive archers and, they'll get real in tune with with their indoor setup in the beginning of the year. And they'll struggle their first couple 3D events because they're so used to aiming at a dot. And now you take that dot away and it turns into a whole nother game. So I'm definitely a big believer in, shooting at 3D targets, or at least something that doesn't have spots or rings or something that you can see on it to better simulate, your hunting situation and where you need to be aiming.
Oh, that's a really good point. Yeah, aiming at animals is huge, and it's a different hold than aiming at a dot. And so shooting those 3D targets, yeah, it seems like every season I'm buying a new 3D target so I can have a 3D to aim at a deer. And yeah, it really helps. And also, sometimes the 3D targets don't teach you to aim at the right spot. Me, with my short draw length, I really have to make sure I stay away from the shoulder. So my shot on a 3D target, I want to be 3 inches off that shoulder bone to give me a little room for error. So that way, if I miss towards the shoulder, I still get them. If I miss the other way, I get liver. And so, I think it's also important to train your brain to aim in the right spot. I see too many guys that aim in that pocket nonstop, and that pocket's a great shot when you hit it, but you sure don't want to hit on the side of that shoulder.
Yeah, the shoulder side of that pocket shot's no good. No matter, even if you're shooting a monster draw length and a ton of weight, you still don't want to hit that shoulder by any means.
No, especially not like on an elk or something like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
But you did touch on a good point there is that, even on those 3D targets, the rings aren't always where you would actually want to put an arrow, especially, some targets, they're, a lot far back sometimes, in my opinion, or a lot too far forward. I've seen that too. But yeah, just being able to get out and shoot at, a solid looking target that doesn't have that, usually, when you're shooting your hunting bow, you usually aren't running magnification or anything like that. So usually those 3D targets, once you put them out, 40, 50, even 30 yards for me, it's usually can't really see the rings, so it's just you're holding on, I completely agree with you. You're trying to hold a couple inches off that back side of that shoulder, trying to execute a money shot without having something necessarily to really rest your pin on other than, the area which you want that arrow to go.
Yeah, just solid brown or solid hair, right? And be able to hold it there without a pin holding you there, or without a dot.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, especially when they, like I said, just when they transition from dot shooting to, whether it be 3D or hunting, I think a lot of people catch a little case of target panic from it just because they don't have a clear reference point of where their pin needs to float, Oh,
I think you're right. So you probably got some good hunts coming up this year. You're located there in Nevada. You got to have some good mule deer hunting down there.
Yeah, no, we definitely have some real good mule deer in Nevada, real good mule deer opportunities, especially on the resident side. I've I haven't ever applied as a non-resident. I've lived in Nevada most of my life, so I don't really know what that's like trying to get drawn out here as a non-resident. But yeah, as a resident, you definitely have some good opportunities with some good units, where you can turn up good bucks for sure.
Yeah, there's so many great little isolated mountain ranges down there, and they can be tough to harvest a deer in there, but you've probably got some pretty good high country hunts. Did you do one last year in Nevada?
Yeah, I actually drew a unit that I really didn't know anything about. So Nevada is a point system, like most of the western states. It's a lottery draw point system. So if you put in, you get up to 5 choices in Nevada. And if you don't draw any of your choices, you'll get a preference point for the next year. But I I really just like hunting the state. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'd love to draw one of the Premier units out here and have a lot of opportunities at, some good deer. But I just love hunting out here so much that usually I'm willing to, sacrifice that to try to draw every year. Now, granted, I'll still put those Premier units as my first and second choice, but I'll put fairly easy to draw units that have, some wilderness area in them or not very accessible, areas in them as my, third, fourth, and fifth choice. And it seems like the last few years I've drawn my, third, fourth, and fifth choice. And, honestly, I've just had a blast out here, trying to figure out new country, seeing new things. And honestly, there hasn't been a unit so far in the, like I said, it's probably been about 5 years since I've drawn my first choice. But even in those 4 years where I've drawn my third, fourth, and fifth choice, every year I've consistently been able to get on a buck that I consider a trophy.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, they're so beautiful there too, and you guys get such good seasons. Like they let you hunt Alpine mule deer when they're supposed to be hunted. Like they let you hunt them a little bit earlier, so they before they shed their velvet, before they go into their secondary living. It's like it's what I'd like to try to talk every state into is an August 10th opener, an August 15th opener. I just think it's such a great season to hunt high country mule deer.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's nice tent weather, you don't have to usually, you have to ride out the occasional thunderstorm because, the Nevada weather, especially at any kind of elevation in August can fluctuate pretty crazy, but usually, it doesn't get too cold at night. You don't have to bring a huge sleeping bag or nothing like that. You're usually fairly comfortable out on the mountain.
Yeah, no, it is nice weather other than your guys' lightning. That state is electric.
Yeah. It is.
Yeah,
very electric.
Yeah, it's so dry, and I think you get some of the storms off the Pacific or something, that come through there. But yeah, it seems like that you really got to be lightning safe in that country because it comes in nearly every afternoon.
Yeah. And like I said, I definitely enjoy being out here in Nevada just because I do have an opportunity, at least as a resident. Like I said, as long as I play my cards right, I've drawn a tag just about every year I've applied. And like I said, I believe it was my fourth choice this last year, which was a new unit that I had never even set foot in. I actually saw it driving to a family Thanksgiving dinner the year before. I kind of saw some mountains kind of off the freeway in the distance, and I thought, man, I wonder what unit that is. I ended up doing my research. It was a fairly easy to draw unit, and ended up getting back there and hunting it. And it was a grind. Definitely, I definitely I put in probably 14 days, probably scouting. I mean, thankfully, it's only about 180 miles from my house. But I was, just about every weekend I had in July and the end of June, I was out there, scouting for deer, and I ended up finding a pretty good buck that I, guess would have gone in the mid to upper 170s, which, is a definite trophy class buck in my book. And actually did get a play at that buck and just couldn't quite find exactly where he had bedded down and stepped on a little loose gravel at the absolute worst moment, and he was probably about 15 yards from me and got up and bolted, and I never was able to relocate that buck. But just being able to go to a new unit, get up there and get hunting and being able to find a buck that, like I said, I consider, a trophy buck, and being able to make a play on him like that was, definitely worth my price of admission this last year.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Love hunting those bucks like that. And those stalks, they're just, they're so methodical and they're so thrilling, it seems like. But yeah, just one wrong step, with that gravel. And, you can be so precise with your foot placement, but it just seems like the country, dictates the noise. Like you be as careful as you can, but at any moment, yeah, that ground could give way and be loose and send a rock rolling down the hill or a little scuff and that deer's gone. But man, those things are so fun to hunt. So did you have his exact bed when you moved in on him, or you just knew he was in a patch, or how did that work?
So what happened was actually we, a couple buddies of mine, we actually drew the tag. We actually didn't even apply together. We applied separate just because we kind of had different ideas of where we wanted to apply this year. And we all ended up drawing the same unit anyway, which was kind of comical. So I was sitting up on the side of the hill with a couple of buddies, and we watched this buck and two other smaller deer on the side of this hill that we were glassing. And they kind of made a bank over not necessarily the horizon of the hill in front of us, but they kind of turned the corner, if you know what I'm saying, around the backside of the hill to where we couldn't see them. So we, boogied around this drainage to get to the other side to where we could get a vantage point on top of them. And again, we caught them going right over to this little patch of junipers. And, they kind of got into those junipers and disappeared, but they never came back out. The sun kind of got to about the middle of the sky. So we knew that they had bedded in there somewhere. And it wasn't a very big patch of junipers. I'm talking maybe, if I had to guess, maybe 80 square feet of just a little patch of junipers. So they were, definitely in there somewhere. So with the wind in Nevada is also kind of touch and go. It was blowing perfect for a stalk down to them at the time, but I knew that any point, especially with it being the afternoon and the thermals kind of dying down, that wind could switch any minute. So I decided wasn't going to try to get too close until I kind of had eyes on them. Well, the entire time I was paying attention to those junipers, and I cannot believe that 3 deer, with the shade of those junipers being right there, that they actually didn't bed under the junipers. They were bedded in sage. And on top of my mind blown that they, didn't actually go up into those junipers to hold up, I just couldn't believe that 3 deer in low-lying sagebrush, maybe 2.5 feet tall, that 3 deer blended in so well to that little clump of sagebrush that I never saw them until I was right up on top of them, essentially.
Just sounds like a mule deer, right? They could just blend in into thin air and just disappear in that open sage, can't they?
Yeah, and I don't know where they were getting their shade from, but man, they seemed content where they were. I said it blew my mind.
Oh, wild. Yeah, those things are just destined to win a lot of the times, that's for sure. Just the way they set themselves up and where they bed and how they bed, and with the wind, we got a lot working against us. Yeah,
no, it's definitely no walk in the park. Definitely hunting the high country mule deer. It's I've never had one walk in the park in my God, I've been hunting them since I was probably 14 years old, and I still haven't had a walk in the park.
Yeah, never easy. They make you earn every single one. Well, Gabe, I can't thank you enough, man. It was really fun to talk over tuning, and I learned a couple things from you that I know I'm going to put in place with my hunting bow. And I just think it's important information to get out there to guys and help them, set up the most forgiving setup they can, or at least learn more about their bow and how it's set up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree. If there's any bit of knowledge that I could give back as far as, to this podcast, because like I said, I've definitely, not quite the stone cold killer that you or a lot of the guests that you have on are, but I've learned a ton from this podcast, and I think I've benefited a lot from it. And like I said, if I could give anything back to the Eastmans elevated community, it'd definitely be a couple tips, as far as bow tuning goes. So I'm glad that I was given the opportunity to come and hopefully share a little bit of knowledge that might help somebody down the road.
Man, how cool. Yeah, thanks a million, Gabe. It was really nice to meet you. We'll have you on again when you kill that big buck out of Nevada this year.
Sounds good, Brian. I look forward to it.
Okay. All right, guys, that's a podcast. Thanks to Gabe. Really fun conversation. I just really enjoy diving deep down the rabbit hole at different subject matters, and especially on bow hunting or on archery. And so to learn how Gabe does things and his beliefs or theories in setting up bow, and then to be able to ask questions on tuning and why he does what he does is really interesting to me. And it's all about gaining that knowledge and becoming a better archer and being more effective and more efficient in the mountains. Like I say, every backcountry bow hunt, every successful backcountry bow hunt will come down to making a shot. You have to make a shot to punch that tag. And I know there'll be some tough shots that come up this year, or that'll be an extreme, or a high degree of difficulty where I'll have a chance to make a shot and punch my tag, maybe on a trophy critter, probably on a trophy critter, and it'll come down to whether or not I can make that shot. And that'll come back to my knowledge base of archery, how much I've practiced all year in executing that shot in the crunch. And I thrive under that pressure, that opportunity. And so, yeah, I'm really working on my game and making sure I'm going to be the absolute best shooter I can be this season. And so spending a bunch of time with my bow and a bunch of time messing with the different tunes of my bow and just making sure that I have the absolute most forgiving setup I can get. So good information to get out there. Really appreciate Gabe being on. Again, our sponsor for today's show is Technu. Poison oak, poison ivy. Make sure you've got a bottle of this Technu in your medicine cabinet, so when you do get into that stuff, this will take away the oils. Also, take away skunk smell, take away sap. It's just a great product. Technu, they there's this funny story of Ike Eastman that tells this story, and Technu's been a sponsor of Eastman's for a little while now, and he was driving his wife's car, and it was his wife's white Suburban, or maybe I don't have the color right, but anyways, driving her rig, and it's like this brand new rig, and so he's driving it, and it was wet out, like these puddles, and he drove through this puddle that a skunk had died in, and it sprayed skunk juice all over the car, and he could not get the smell out of his car. It was everywhere. It permeated. It splashed up on the bottom of the car, on the side of the car. He finally ended up giving his car a full bath in Technu, and that's what got rid of the smell. He said he thought he was going to have to sell the car, but anyways, pretty funny story. But yeah, Technu, just a great product. Thanks to those guys for sponsoring the podcast. Yeah, and over there at Eastman's, just putting out some good podcasts. I'm just trying to get really good conversations with guys and pick their brain. I got some really good elk calling ones coming up. Got some good guests there, and just overall content to make us all better bow hunters. It's just we're a community of guys just trying to get better, and I'm definitely trying to get better at my end of things, thinking quick, and also, trying to understand, what makes us better, and what questions to ask, what information to gather, to make us all, better bow hunters in the end. So anyways, doing that. Gosh, turned in an article for Eastmans. Yeah, good podcast coming up. I think that's all I have. Had a really good day shed hunting this past weekend. I don't have a lot of time right now. I wish I had more. I used to just love shed hunting, and I kind of got away from it, putting all my focus into bow hunting. But if I've got a free day, I should be out in the mountains, and that it pushes me to do those really long treks with tons of elevation, tons of miles, and I'm in the mountains carrying a pack, and also just being in the mountains makes me happy. Like it's a fun place to be, to challenge myself and be with nature, and then you've got a bonus of hopefully finding a nice 6-point horn if you're lucky. So had a really good day Saturday. I think I got 5 Saturday, and it's still early. 4 of them were all really nice big 6 points, and then one kind of younger 5 point, but still it was just a great day of horn hunting. I got the other side to a set that I had, and it was one of the bigger bulls I'd found this season. So anyways, it's been really fun just charging the mountains and trying to get these legs in shape, get ready for bear season. And still getting my runs in and my training, and definitely getting my shooting. I am really focused on that bow this season. There isn't a day that goes by that I'm not firing arrows down range, and just trying to work on different things. And then, not just, a lot of times I'll set up my bow in the beginning and set it up how I like it and mess with it a little bit, and then it's good to go for season. And I was spending a little bit more time just fine-tuning things and revisiting things on my bow, and going, well, what if I put a twist here and time this cam different? What's that do for me? Just messing around with things a little bit more, just trying to take my game to the next level. So, all right. That's a podcast. I'll check in with you guys next week. Thanks as always for all the support on the podcast, the iTunes reviews. Those things really help me out. And then the social media, the I can't remember what social media I'm on, but I want to say iTunes. I don't know because I was just talking about reviews, but the Instagram and Facebook and things. So trying to put out consistent content and keep on it, and then still have a still have a normal life, or get everything in, finding my balance, spending time with family, getting my work in, getting the podcast stuff done, working on my archery, getting my runs in, horn hunting in my free time, and then also I've got about 4 construction projects, a big house I'm starting and things. So plenty going on here. I just need to get all this stuff taken care of by the time August, September rolls around, so I can just go hunt. So that's the goal. All right. Thanks, you guys. Talk to you soon.